In the peaceful suburb of Vineland, New Jersey, where neighbors greeted each other over white picket fences and crime was mostly the stuff of TV dramas, nobody expected blood to be spilled, let alone by someone they knew. Barry Schmalbach was a 43-year-old man with a gentle demeanor and an easy laugh. He lived alone in a modest home and was often seen jogging through the neighborhood or chatting with the elderly couple next door. His life seemed uneventful, until it ended. On the morning of October 27, 2015, Barry's sister tried to reach him but got no response. That was unusual. They were close, texting regularly. Concerned, she drove to his house. What she found would set off a storm of questions that still haunt the community today. Barry was dead, brutally beaten and strangled in his own home. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, just a lifeless body on the living room floor and a silence that screamed betrayal. The police were immediately called to the scene. Officers described a chaotic but intimate struggle. Barry had fought back. There were signs of resistance, overturned furniture, blood splatter, and defensive wounds. Whoever did this knew Barry. That much was clear. But what wasn't clear was why someone would want him dead. Barry wasn't involved in drugs. He wasn't in trouble with the law. He didn't live dangerously. He had a full-time job, paid his bills on time, and spent his weekends volunteering at a local food pantry. He was the kind of person you'd trust to feed your dog or pick up your mail. That made his murder all the more disturbing. Investigators began questioning everyone in Barry's life. Friends, co-workers, ex-partners. That's when a name kept coming up: Christopher. Christopher, whose full name was eventually revealed as Christopher Gonzalez, wasn't just a casual acquaintance. He had once been romantically involved with Barry. The relationship, by all accounts, was toxic. Friends said Christopher was manipulative, secretive, and emotionally abusive. Barry, they believed, had tried to end things multiple times but kept getting pulled back in. Some speculated it was love. Others said it was fear. Police began to dig deeper. They learned that just days before the murder, Barry had confided in a friend that Christopher had been acting strange, showing up uninvited, sending late-night texts, making veiled threats. Barry said he was thinking of getting a restraining order. Then he went silent. When investigators brought Christopher in for questioning, his calm demeanor shocked them. He didn't seem rattled. He said he hadn't seen Barry in weeks. He claimed they were no longer in contact and that he had moved on. But there were problems with his story. For one, phone records showed Christopher's number pinged a tower just a few blocks from Barry's home the night of the murder. When asked about that, Christopher shrugged. "I was visiting a friend, but that friend couldn't be located." The alibi fell apart. Still, without physical evidence tying him to the scene, police couldn't charge him. Frustrated but determined, detectives began to piece together a timeline. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed a man matching Christopher's description driving what looked like Barry's car around midnight. The footage was grainy, just enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to confirm identity. They searched Christopher's apartment but found nothing connecting him to the crime. No blood, no clothing, no murder weapon. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, just like the answers they were hoping for. As weeks turned into months, the case slowed. Public interest faded. News coverage died down. But Barry's family never stopped fighting for justice. They were certain Christopher was responsible, and they weren't the only ones. Online sleuths began posting theories, connecting dots, and poring over public records. A Reddit thread titled, "Did Christopher Gonzalez kill Barry Schmalbach?" gained traction. People wanted answers, but the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. The one man who could shed light on what happened, Christopher, was living free, and Barry's killer was still out there. To understand how Barry Schmalbach ended up dead in his own home, we need to dig deeper into the life of Christopher Gonzalez, the man at the center of the storm. Who was he, really? To outsiders, Christopher was charming, intelligent, and quick with a smile. But to those who got too close, he was something else entirely: manipulative, possessive, and coldly calculating. Christopher had a checkered past. Born and raised in New Jersey, he had a history of turbulent relationships and run-ins with the law. Most of his arrests were minor disturbances, public intoxication, trespassing, but one thing stood out: a 2012 restraining order filed by another former partner who claimed Christopher stalked him for months after their breakup. The police report described late-night phone calls, shadowy figures seen outside windows, and veiled threats. That case never led to charges, but it painted a picture, a disturbing one. Christopher didn't handle rejection well, and when Barry tried to cut ties, it's possible he triggered something dark and dangerous. Friends of Barry described their relationship as on and off. Barry was generous, empathetic, and often gave people too many chances. Christopher used that to his advantage. He would disappear for weeks, then reappear with promises of change. He played on Barry's loneliness and his need to believe people could be better. But behind the scenes, Christopher was keeping tabs. One friend recalled a chilling moment just weeks before the murder. Barry had received a birthday card in the mail, with no name, no return address, just the message: "You can't run from what we have." Barry laughed it off at the time, but now, in retrospect, it feels like a warning. Police began interviewing others from Christopher's past. Pattern emerged. One ex-boyfriend said Christopher used fake identities to track his movements. Another claimed Christopher had threatened to make him disappear. Several reported emotional manipulation and gaslighting so intense, they sought therapy afterward. But perhaps the most revealing piece came from a former roommate who told detectives that Christopher kept a burn box, a locked container with photos, letters, and keepsakes from every person he'd been with. It was obsessive, even creepy. When asked if Barry's name ever came up, the roommate nodded. He said Barry owed him, and he was going to collect. This wasn't about love. It was about control. Back at the crime scene, forensics re-examined one curious detail: a broken picture frame near Barry's body. Inside was a photo of him and Christopher at a beach in Cape May, smiling. But the glass was shattered, and Christopher's face was scratched out, as if Barry had grown tired of the manipulation. Was that the final act of defiance that pushed Christopher over the edge? Detectives believed the motive was clear: jealousy and rejection. Barry was trying to move on. He was texting new people, going on dates. And Christopher, who had always seen himself as in control, couldn't handle being discarded. But belief isn't proof. The investigation stalled again. Without DNA, fingerprints, or a confession, everything was circumstantial. Christopher refused to take a polygraph. He hired a lawyer, stopped answering questions, and disappeared from the public eye. No job, no social media, like a ghost. Then, out of nowhere, a break came from an unlikely place: a burner phone. Months after the murder, a detective obtained a court order to access tower data from the area around Barry's home. They discovered a previously unlinked phone number, active only during the 48 hours surrounding the crime. That phone made 4 calls. 2 were to Barry, the other 2, one to a rideshare company, the other to a pay-as-you-go phone retailer. Guess who the store clerk remembered? "Yeah, I sold him that phone," the clerk said. He was jumpy, paid in cash, didn't want a receipt. The store had CCTV footage. It showed Christopher Gonzalez. Now they had something solid. But would it be enough to make an arrest? The case was building, but time was running out. Without a warrant or a confession, the suspect could vanish again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. By early 2003, the story of Barry Schmalbach's death had begun to unravel, but not in the way the small town of Gibbstown, New Jersey, expected. Rumors were swirling, but none seemed to stick. Meanwhile, Christopher, Barry's partner, maintained his composure. He played the grieving boyfriend flawlessly, appearing at vigils, giving soft-spoken interviews, and cooperating just enough with investigators to avoid raising alarm. But behind the scenes, cracks in his carefully curated facade were beginning to show. The puzzle pieces don't fit. As detectives reviewed the crime scene again and again, they found inconsistencies. For one, Barry was found dead in his own home, seated in a recliner, with a pillow over his head and a gunshot wound to the face. But there was no sign of forced entry, no struggle, and no blood trail anywhere else in the house. It looked staged, too neat, too calculated. Christopher's alibi also had holes. He claimed he'd gone out for a walk that night and returned home to find Barry dead. But neighbors reported not seeing Christopher leave the house at all. In fact, some said they saw him taking out trash around the same time Barry was estimated to have died. What was in the trash? Investigators dug into that too. Though garbage pickup had already occurred, they recovered surveillance footage from a nearby gas station that showed Christopher dumping a black bag into a public trash can. That bag was never recovered, but it was enough to make detectives dig deeper. A history of control. The deeper they looked, the more disturbing Christopher's past became. Ex-partners came forward, quietly at first, sharing stories of emotional abuse, financial control, and manipulation. One ex described how Christopher isolated him from friends and family, slowly taking over his life. Another mentioned being threatened with blackmail if they ever exposed Christopher's erratic behavior. But there was one testimony that stood out. A man who had briefly dated Christopher just before he met Barry. This man claimed that Christopher had once fantasized about what it would be like to get away with the perfect murder. It was no longer just suspicion, it was becoming a profile. The breakthrough. Then came the biggest break in the case. Investigators discovered Barry had recently been speaking with a lawyer about updating his life insurance policy. The policy, worth over $500,000, had previously listed Christopher as the sole beneficiary. But in a draft email found on Barry's laptop, he had written to the lawyer stating he wanted to change the beneficiary to his sister. That email was dated just 2 days before Barry's death. If Christopher had discovered Barry's intentions, he had motive. And with no forced entry and no signs of struggle, he likely had opportunity. Confronting the web of lies, detectives confronted Christopher with their findings. He denied everything, insisting the relationship had been happy, that he knew nothing of any insurance change, and that he would never hurt Barry. But the facade was cracking. One detective recalled, "He was so calm at first, measured, deliberate, but as we closed in, you could see it. The arrogance fading, the fear creeping in. The final nail came from digital forensics." Christopher had searched terms like how to kill someone with a pillow, how to stage a suicide, and gunshot residue timeline on his laptop. Just days before Barry's death, it was clear Christopher had planned it. Maybe not far in advance, but with chilling precision. But even as evidence mounted, Christopher refused to confess. He was a manipulator through and through, still convinced he could twist the narrative. The trial of Christopher, now charged with first-degree murder in the death of Barry Schmalbach, became one of the most talked-about cases in New Jersey's Gloucester County history. Reporters flooded the courthouse, true crime bloggers latched onto every detail, and the once quiet community of Gibbstown turned into a focal point for national media. But despite the damning evidence, one question still loomed. Would justice truly be served? The courtroom showdown. From the start, Christopher's defense strategy leaned heavily on reasonable doubt. His attorneys portrayed him as a loving, loyal partner who had been unfairly targeted by overzealous detectives. They claimed the investigation had been rushed, the evidence circumstantial, and the media portrayal of Christopher as a manipulative killer entirely speculative. The prosecution, however, came prepared. They laid out a meticulous timeline of Barry's final days, presented digital records of Christopher's disturbing search history, and called witnesses who had endured his controlling behavior in the past. A tech expert demonstrated how Christopher's fingerprint had been found on the interior trigger housing of the gun, something that wouldn't happen if he had merely discovered Barry's body. Still, the defense questioned the integrity of the digital evidence. They claimed it could have been planted or misinterpreted. But it was the emotional testimony from Barry's sister that changed the atmosphere in the courtroom. She read the draft email Barry had written to his lawyer, the one about removing Christopher as his life insurance beneficiary, and said, with tears in her eyes, "My brother was planning to move on, and Christopher couldn't handle that." The room went silent. The verdict, After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty of first-degree murder. Christopher sat motionless as the verdict was read, his expression unreadable. But a single tear slid down his cheek as the judge handed down a sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in emotion. Some cried in relief. Others, like Christopher's few remaining supporters, sat in stunned silence. Aftermath. A town still healing. For Barry's family, the conviction offered closure, but not healing. They had lost a beloved son, brother, and friend. His murder wasn't random. It was personal, premeditated, cold. In the months following the trial, Gibbstown slowly returned to a new normal. But Barry's case left a lasting impact. The town became more aware of domestic violence in same-sex relationships, something that had long gone underreported. A local advocacy group, founded in Barry's name, now offers resources for LGBTQ+ individuals in toxic or dangerous relationships. Its slogan reads, "Silence isn't safety. Evil in plain sight." Christopher's story is a chilling reminder that not all monsters hide in shadows. Some smile at neighborhood barbecues. Some bring flowers to funerals. Some sit beside you on the couch, telling you they love you, while planning your death. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't an intruder. He was the man Barry trusted most. And that's what made his betrayal so deadly. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for more true crime story.